Good evening. This is Charles Hargrove, candidate for District 11 in New York, which is the area that comprises Staten Island and the southern part of Brooklyn along the Belt Parkway. This evening, I'd like to touch on a couple of things just to give you something to think about over the weekend. If you have not listened to my interview on the Brian Nichols show, then please look at the link further down in the Twitter feed or Facebook feed. One of the topics I'd like to cover tonight has to do with the misperception that some people have on taxes. Now, while we all agree that we don't like taxes, there are some situations where we do need them to carry out some programs which could be temporary in nature and eventually could disappear as soon as we get either the need for them to also disappear or private corporations take them over. So one of the things that you're always hearing about are that the rich don't pay their fair share in taxes. And, it's the top 1% or 10% that should be paying more. Well, more what? More dollars or more as a percentage of what they make? Let's take some basic bits of data. In the United States today, if you are making as a family $150,000 a year, then you are, believe it or not, in the top 10% of wage earners in this country. Yeah, only $150,000. So if you're both husband and wife working and you're averaging about $75,000 apiece, which is about $35 an hour, then you are considered in the top 10% of this country. And people at your level and higher combined pay 71% of all of the federal income tax that is collected each year. Well, what about the people that make more money? Well, if combined you're making $190,000 a year, which granted most people who work in offices and fast food and basic types of jobs, you don't make that much. But let's say you're doing well. You might be like a friend of mine who is an IT manager who's making $120,000 a year after many years of deep technical projects, and his wife is making $70,000 as an office manager somewhere. Well, that's $190,000. Well, that's the top 5% in the country. Well, the top 1% is if you're making about $500,000 a year combined. And that tends to be very successful business people. Those who are of millionaire and billionaire status are like the top 1/10 of 1%. Now, most people, and I know this by direct relationship with certain people, that make under, let's say, $30,000-$40,000 a year, that after you take into account all the deductions and the earned income credit and child care credits and whatnot, and this is just on the federal taxes, we're not even counting state of New York where I live, those people net out at zero. In fact, I know one person who only made $28,000 a year. And when they filled out their federal tax return, not only did they get back every single penny that they paid in throughout the year, but they also got back another $3,500. So, in effect, the government paid them on top of their salary. So, while individual circumstances may not be exactly the same, you have to look at overall what is actually being paid and who is actually doing the paying. Now, like I first indicated, any family that's making $150,000 a year or more are in the top 10% or higher, and they pay 71% of all the income tax that is collected by the federal government. So when you look at numbers like that, you have to really take into account the raw data when you make a decision before coming out with some blanket statement that you probably heard on the news or by some political party. You have to learn to think for yourself. Now, that's just federal. Here in New York State, you could be paying, if you're in the top bracket, you could be paying like another 50%. So, what I think is a more equitable solution, if we are going to have income taxes, which most of the history of this country we did not have income taxes. It's mostly over the past 100 years, 105 years. But if we do have to have an income tax, how about a flat tax? Let's say, for sake of a number, which necessarily wouldn't be necessary, but let's say 10%. And if we say 10%, if you make $10,000 a year, you pay $1,000 in taxes. You make $1 million a year, you'll pay $100,000 in taxes. So the more you make, the more you're going to pay. And I think that's the only fair way to do it. Leave your comments below.